culture shaped by the worship of violent dictators. The glorification of mythologized feats of the past.
Nobody knows when or where this so-called battle on ice took place, yet it has somehow become the ultimate historic victory.
Glorification of traitors and executioners.
He drowned Novgorod in blood, essentially capturing his own ancient Orthodox city and slaughtering everyone he could.
Justifying war crimes and wars of aggression.
Hence, these schizophrenic, idiotic slogans, "We can do it again." What are 27 million casualties after all?
The insatiable drive to canonize bloodthirsty generals.
He orchestrated more than one butcher, then welcomed a delegation of Poles who were preparing to surrender, right in the middle of a pile of corpses.
And imperial sadists.
Often, the one who ascends the throne turns out to be a pathologically cruel individual.
How does the Russian state seek out its kind in the annals of history, and whom does it emulate? Find out in our special report, Russia's Idols, how the Kremlin promotes a cult of violent rulers and warlords. Idolatry, cult worship, exaltation, and glorification of bloody dictators, generals, collaborators, and sadists have become part of the Kremlin's policy to intoxicate its own population. From the depths of history, the Russian regime resurrects figures that serve its narrative to justify a struggle against the West, invasions of sovereign states, war crimes, and intensifying domestic repression. Who are these figures in the Kremlin's Pantheon? Whom does the Russian regime idolize and forgive the most appalling atrocities to justify its own methods of governance? Here are the top 7 idols of Putin's Russia. Alexander Yaroslavich, nicknamed Nevsky, occupies a special place in the Kremlin's pantheon of idols. He was a lucky commander.
Alexander Nevsky never lost a single battle in his life.
He's immensely convenient for Russian authorities and their mouthpieces in promoting the image of a defender against external threats. The narrative is directed both at Russians and residents of the occupied territories in Ukraine. Saving the Russian-speaking population, a brotherly nation in distress. It was with these slogans that the 2014 invasion of Ukraine and the occupation of parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions began. No expense is spared in preserving the cult of this protector prince. Here, Putin, flanked by Patriarch Kirill, unveils the Nevsky Memorial, which cost Russian taxpayers over 112 million rubles.
Искренняя, глубокая любовь нашего народа к нему передается из поколения в поколение.
It's hard to speak for the whole nation, but Putin himself clearly feels a deep affection for Nevsky. This medieval prince embodies Putin's personal obsession, the fight against the West and NATO.
Здесь, на Чудском озере, князь Александр Невский со своей дружиной разгромил иноземных захватчиков.
The 1240 Battle of the Neva and the Battle on the Ice 2 years later are sacred victories for today's Russian government because he repelled the Swedish and German invaders, or as the old chronicles would put it, defended the Russian land.
The battle on the ice, at best, was a local skirmish in lands belonging to the Novgorod Republic, which had no relation to Moscow. But over time, it was mythologized and romanticized. A vague event, possibly a fabricated one, turned into the defining battle of Russian history.
Nevsky's groveling before the Khans of the Golden Horde and his collaboration with them is, in Russian propaganda, portrayed as yet another act of salvation.
He saved our country from the Catholic temptation and offered to convert Russia to Catholicism in exchange for protection from the Horde. Alexander Nevsky, in his wisdom, decided to pay tribute to the Horde instead, but refused Catholicism. Thank God.
You won't find it mentioned in school textbooks, but Nevsky traveled thousands of kilometers to the Horde to beg, literally grovel at the Mongol Khan's feet, for the title of Grand Prince.
His motivations were simple: power, money, and the Horde's seal of approval. But as they say, the devil is in the details.
The Mongols never conquered Novgorod. It remained a free, independent republic. Yet Nevsky persuaded its citizens, sometimes by force, sometimes by cunning, to pay tribute to the Horde. Is that heroic? No, it's the act of a true collaborator, a real criminal, a traitor to his own people.
None of this stopped Tsar Ivan the Terrible, 3 centuries later, from canonizing Nevsky as a saint for defending the Orthodox faith and resisting foreign influence.
Хотел бы вам преподнести образ этого святого угодника, покровителя родного для нас с вами брата. Чтобы он хранил вас, как воин, укреплял вас, особенно в тех случаях, когда силой нужно оберегать Россию.
Хранитель российской государственности.
Nevsky marks the start of orthodoxy with a sword, an ideology tailor-made for the future empire.
These military saints were canonized because they were imperial. The Russian Orthodox Church contributed to the sacralization of empire through its militarist form. One only needs to look at the Russian Armed Forces main cathedral. It's the embodiment of this militant orthodoxy, complete with its own saints.
The Kremlin is toying with the idea of canonizing another general, Generalissimo Alexander Suvorov. And nothing about his so-called military achievements gives Putin's regime pause.
He committed multiple buchas. In yet another Russo-Turkish war, Suvorov captured Izmail. Ukrainian Cossacks were the first to enter, followed by Russian troops under Suvorov's command. Suvorov ordered the execution of all prisoners, men, women, and children. The civilian population was completely wiped out, tens of thousands dead. In Warsaw, he suppressed the Kościuszko uprising. 20,000 civilians killed. He razed the suburbs of the Polish capital. Then, when receiving a Polish delegation preparing to surrender, he did so surrounded by heaps of corpses. That's the Saint Suvorov.
To justify violence and promote the idea of victory at any cost, the Kremlin invokes the image of Georgy Zhukov. His so-called success story distracts from the brutal reality of the regime. Today, the state promotes the cult of the marshal who fought the Nazis, while itself following an eerily similar path.
Zhukov has long been considered a heroic general in Russia, a brilliant strategist who supposedly made no mistakes and delivered victory, especially at Stalingrad, allegedly saving the world from Nazism. That's why Zhukov becomes such a tempting role model today.
He's not just admired by armchair patriots chanting, "We can do it again." He is revered by the current leadership of the Imperial Army.
The Russian army doesn't know how to fight any other way than by sheer numbers. Hence, the resurrection of Zhukov's image, a commander who, despite lacking technology, won battles by throwing bodies at the enemy. And today's Russian commanders do exactly the same. Nobody ever referred to Zhukov as anything but a butcher. No one ever called him a military genius. What today's war correspondents describe is exactly what Zhukov did: bury the enemy under corpses.
So far, our ranking has spotlighted the lesser idols, monsters, to be sure, but also lackeys of even greater beasts. Catherine the Great, widely known as a reforming monarch, a German by birth who embraced and enriched Russian culture. She converted to Orthodoxy and ruled for over 3 decades.
A cultivated woman, perhaps a bit libertine, with many lovers. This is the soap opera version of Catherine from 10 or 15 years ago, a queen who brought more European ideals, education, and culture to Russia.
But the cultural angle is irrelevant to the Kremlin elite when imperial ambitions are at stake. Catherine aimed to conquer and Russify the Southeast territories. The so-called Novorossiya was her pet project. A project that should have died a century ago, but Putin is now resurrecting it through war against a sovereign state with internationally recognized borders. To justify the violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, the Mad Empress fits the narrative perfectly.
Putin has long been infatuated with the image of Catherine II, a land gatherer, a destroyer of freedoms, burning the Sich to the ground, stripping the Cossacks of their liberties, all traits Putin and Russian history associate with autocracy and greatness.
The main trophy of today's regime, seized from the Ottoman Empire, was the Crimean Peninsula. Yes, this too was an annexation.
The state and certain nationalist groups are feverishly reconstructing the memory of Catherine as a war queen, the one who conquered Crimea and attacked the Ukrainians. The crown jewel of Putin's political legacy is Crimea, and Catherine the Great is its historical precursor. She is being revived. What's forgotten is what happened to Crimea's indigenous population. Not only the Tatars, but also Greeks and Armenians fled. There was nothing noble about this imperial annexation. That's all conveniently erased.
The man who was crowned a czar and died an emperor is an essential figure in the Putinist Pantheon, Peter the Great. He's idolized not just for opening a window to Europe, but for his obsession with endless wars, even if they achieved little.
Северную войну 21 год вел. Казалось бы, там воевал со Швецией, что-то отторгал. Ничего не отторгал. Он возвращал.
Peter I was in a state of constant warfare, and Putin is ready to do the same, wage endless war.
Peter's methods are all too familiar to the Kremlin ruler. Brutality toward civilians in occupied territories, sadistic treatment of prisoners of war.
He was a war criminal. In Ukraine, he committed genocide, the massacre of civilians in Baturin. Not to mention the destruction of the sick, the mass execution of POWs, impalement, torture.
Peter's lust for violence extended to bizarre medical experiments. He pulled healthy teeth from his subjects, just for fun. He kept the teeth as trophies. These facts are conveniently omitted to preserve the image of the father, the wise and great reformer.
Peter the Great was a necrophiliac. There are accounts of him traveling to his beloved Netherlands where he was drawn to anatomical theaters. What did he do there? He stroked corpses with joy and tenderness. He loved watching the dead. He made his subjects bite into cadavers. After ordering executions, he personally took part in them. He enjoyed watching blood flow. He had his enemies dug up after burial just to execute them again. His passion for corpses and violence gave him sadistic pleasure. He didn't just commit violence, he got drunk on it.
He treated his subjects no better. During the suppression of the Streltsy Rebellion, over 2,000 were arrested, more than 1,000 executed. Many had the honor of dying by the Tsar's own hand.
Peter personally crushed the Streltsy uprising. He invented horrific punishments. People were tortured before they even confessed, though they were willing to talk. No, he did it purely for the thrill of taking part.
Ivan the Terrible has been turned into a national brand, more famous worldwide than even Peter the Great. A sun killer, a mass murderer who commanded an army of killers. This iconic example of Russian autocracy helps modern propaganda sell key Kremlin messages: the need for a strong hand, the glorification of unchecked power,
an absolute sadist who derived physical pleasure from watching human suffering and death in its most brutal forms. Throwing people to the dogs, watching a starving bear tear a man apart, or simply roasting someone alive in a giant pan. All of it was entertainment for Ivan the Terrible. These acts of cruelty were spontaneous. He could point to anyone in a crowd, accuse them of treason on a whim, and order them executed on the spot. And the terrifying reality is that this monster is now being glorified. Monuments to him are going up across Russia. In Russia, whether it's a czar, an emperor, a party general secretary, or the current president, the throne is often occupied by someone pathologically cruel. While in most empires throughout history, tyrants emerge occasionally. In Russia, the pattern is extreme.
The main function of the idol known as Ivan the Terrible is to embody the gatherer of Russian lands. In the 16th century, Muscovy significantly expanded its territory, conquering and wiping out the Kazan Khanate, one of the successors of the Golden Horde, followed by the Astrakhan Khanate. Everything from the Urals to the Caspian Sea was seized through war. Hybrid warfare didn't exist back then. There was only straightforward brutality. The Tsar's will was absolute, and no constitution existed. Those who dared to oppose tyranny were slaughtered. In 1570, an entire city was annihilated. According to various estimates, between 2,000 and 15,000 people were executed.
Why then is Ivan the Terrible absent from the Millennium of Russia monument in Veliki Novgorod, a structure erected even before the revolution, featuring more than 100 historical figures? Because he drowned Novgorod in blood. Having seized the ancient Orthodox city, he killed everyone he could, and those who miraculously survived were deported.
And yet, Ivan the Terrible pales in comparison to the man who tops the list of Russian idols, the unrivaled figure, Joseph Stalin.
There's a ridiculous number of panic mongers claiming to support Russia or the army, and yet they spew nonsense. During Stalin's time, panic mongers were simply shot. Everyone keeps saying, back in Stalin's day. Well, then let's take the best of Stalin's era. Any rational person understands we are at war now. And in war, certain measures must be taken, whatever the cost. We shouldn't waste time overthinking. We must march toward victory, no matter what we have to do.
In modern Russia, Stalin has become a convenient figure, used to justify war crimes and mass atrocities, especially during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka, mass graves in Izium and Kherson, torture, humiliation, and murder of civilians follow wherever Russian troops set foot. Executions of unarmed prisoners of war. Stalin's cult fits perfectly as a way to justify the great victory.
There is no sense of an actual war in Russian public discourse, certainly not a monstrous and horrifying one. What exists instead is the great patriotic victory, seemingly born out of nowhere. Russians are raised as the children of victory, not of war. That's the horror. From there come schizophrenic, idiotic slogans like, "We can do it again." What do they mean? Repeat what? 27 million dead? I knew real war veterans. Veterans hated Stalin with a deep and burning hatred.
The myth of the great victory under a great leader is a perfect excuse to justify the loss of over 1 million Russian troops since the full-scale invasion began and to conceal the country's deepening poverty.
And with Putin being utterly incompetent, his generals corrupt and inept, it becomes clear that victory can only be achieved through mass slaughter. Taking a single square kilometer of Ukrainian land may cost 1,000, 2,000, even 10,000 Russian lives. That's where Stalin comes in handy again. No sacrifice is too great. The price of victory doesn't matter. How could such a butcher not be glorified?
Stalin is also useful for justifying domestic repression. True, today's Russia hasn't yet matched the scale of past purges, but appetite comes with eating.
The Tsar Kaganovich, one of Stalin's most devoted henchmen, was inexperienced but brutally ruthless. He said, "We remove people in layers." First to be purged were politically and socially active citizens from before the October Revolution. Then came other groups. The Soviet Union even had an official legal term for them: former people. That wasn't a metaphor, it was a juridical category. These were citizens stripped of all rights.
And Stalin also serves as a kind of propaganda gold standard when it comes to Russia rising from its knees. A global actor co-responsible for starting World War II alongside Hitler, with whom the Soviet Union signed a secret pact.
These tropes are constant because war in Russia is always portrayed as an eternal continuation of the great patriotic struggle against Nazi evil. Stalin and others become key characters in that eternal myth.
And for Kremlin propagandists, Stalin is the easiest idol to maintain because the burden of keeping the Gulag Emperor's cult alive is shouldered largely by the so-called deep people of Russia, who periodically return to the idea of his canonization. Even without state effort, he is venerated like a saint.
The people loved Stalin because under Stalin, no parasite in power could grow fat. Everyone was hanging by a thread, and everyone lived in fear.
Figures like Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, and Stalin, no matter how cruel or bloody, are seen by the people as symbols of strength and stability. A firm hand, predictable order. That's exactly why Putin appeals to them.
Putin's strategy is simple. By feeding a distorted, sterilized history to the masses, one where atrocities and genocide are repackaged as patriotic feats and where butchers become national heroes. The Kremlin accustoms Russians to the idea that abuse of one's own people or the destruction of others is not evil but a noble act, done for some mythical mission, or simply to feel superior.
This construct, dreamed up by the twisted minds of Putin and Vladimir Medinsky, leads to a total disregard for history, for governance, for responsibility. They just exploit the fact that the Russian people obediently follow orders and swallow every crime committed against them. This mentality hasn't gone anywhere in the past 500 years. It lives deep within the soul of the spiritually bound Russian nation, occasionally reawakening in monstrous crimes like today's invasion and attempted annihilation of Ukraine.
Russia venerates its idols and always will. It takes pride in Suvorov while watching innocent people die. It glorifies Zhukov and steps over corpses to storm enemy lines. It crosses itself before Stalin's mustache and files anonymous denunciations on friends. It will continue to support Putin's crimes and those of any future tyrant who follows him.
Until Russia completely collapses, no real change will happen, just as it didn't in Germany until after 1945.
Russia is a state built on the cult of bloodthirsty tyrants and cold-blooded murderers. A country where history is rewritten and falsified, where traitors, collaborators, maniacs, and sadists are presented as legendary generals and statesmen. Their crimes, which cost millions of lives, are recast as glorious milestones. Putin is now desperately trying to secure his own place in this pantheon of false idols. But the goal isn't just ego. This counterfeit version of Russian history and its heroes is a tool of propaganda, a way to convince the population that Putin's war crimes in Ukraine are nothing unusual, just the legacy of his predecessors. It fuels imperial nostalgia and ensures that the Russian public will support even the most horrific acts carried out by the Kremlin. Olga Mihailuk, Special Report.